Worksheet 12 today, we're going to talk about advanced graphing. So when you take the quiz on this stuff, there will be graphing that doesn't include phase shifts that will be 1 5-point score. You know what I'm talking about? And then there'll be advanced graphing, and that will have ones with phase shifts. You only have to do one. And then it also has writing an equation in that section. And then there's a third score on graphing of trig functions that is modeling, where you have to take a word problem and write the equation. So there are 3 4.4 scores. All right. So this one is a warm-up, the top of 12. Can anybody tell me what the amplitude is? Yes, the amplitude is the multiplied in front number. And what do you know that's kind of weird about the amplitude? It's always positive, okay? The B value is what comes out of the equation. This is A, this is B, this is D, actually. So the B value is 3, which makes the period, the actual length of one cycle, into what? 2 pi over 3. And then we're going to need quarter points for that in a second. But the vertical shift is added or subtracted onto either the front or the back. What is the added or subtracted number here? Okay, down 1, right? Because of this -1 on the back. All right, the quarter points are every 1/4 of a period. So you might want to write yourself that note again. Quarter points is a period divided by 4. And if there is a phase shift, you add that on to the phase shift. But there is no phase shift here. So our period of 2 pi over 3, dividing that by 4 is actually the same as multiplying by what? 1/4. So we end up with 2 pi over 12. Can you reduce that though? Pi over 6, okay? So we're going to count by pi over 6s. Now, it's a sine graph, so where does it start? Yeah, at 0, except this one has been shifted down. All right, you can relabel this as the midline, y equals -1, or you can actually draw a midline down at y equals -1, your choice. How far above and below for the max and the mins? 2 units, so the maxes are all at +1, and the mins are all at -3. I usually draw myself little dotted lines to show that's where you're going to start and stop, Hofbauer, and you can't go above or below. All right. We took care of the amplitude. We took care of the vertical shift. There is no phase shift, so we're going to just start drawing the shape, and then we'll figure out how to label it. Starts at the midline, up, back to the midline, down, back to the midline. I still don't know how to do this because he dropped the second half of pre-calc. Yes, he's here. Thanks. All right. Period. Where did this end then? Was 2 pi over 3, comma, -1. All right, now to go back and put in the quarter points, there's no shift, so they started here at over 0 down at -1. Then it went over pi over 6 into the max of 1. Then it went over another pi over 6, which would be 2 pi over 6s, so we should label it pi over 3. It's down at -1. Then this one is 3 pi over 6s, which reduces to pi over 2, and that one's down at -3. Okay, be very careful, guys. Is this really have a starting and stopping point? No, this should continue on, okay, and going this way. You don't have to draw that on yours. I'm fine, but when you go to do the domain and range, I don't want you to tell me, where you started and stopped, I want you to tell me what? Yeah, all real numbers, because this little wave would keep going and going and going and going. Okay, but range, it does have a bottom and a top. It only waves between what? Very good. Bottom to top. -3 and 1. Any questions? Everybody feel like they kind of remember that stuff? Okay. Today we're going to get a little more complicated. We're going to throw in a phase shift. Now, if you are in this form, where it is unfactored, in other words, the b is still inside on the x, and the c is with it, you have to take the c and do the opposite, because if you went to the right, it would go left. Okay, if it said plus, it would go left. Sorry, I didn't say that word. And then you divide out the b. If you actually factor it first, then you won't have to do that. Whatever is left, once you've done this, just kidding. If you make it be in this form, oh, that was right there, right above where I wrote it. Already said that. If you factor it out, then this will tell you the shift. You won't have to do that divided by b business. All right, I think that's all we need for today off that slide. Quarter points, this is what's going to happen when there's a phase shift. You're going to take the period divided by 4, and that's what you're going to count by, but you're going to add, for the first one, you're going to add the phase shift. So you're going to do the phase shift plus the period divided by 4 will give you the next point. And then you're going to keep adding on the period divided by 4. So let me just talk about this real quick. If it was this graph, okay, and it had out here a pi is the b. If b is pi, then the period is 2 pi over b, which would be what? 2 pi divided by pi, which would be, the period is now 2, right? The quarter points would be 2 divided by 4, which is, no, 2 divided by 4 is 1/2. Are we good? Okay. So the first point we're going to start at, this would shift it which way? Right 1. So you would start at 1, and then you would keep adding 1/2. So the next one would be 3/2, the next one would be 2, and so on. Okay? You keep adding that quarter point onto the phase shift. All right, here we go. Oh, guess we could have just done this problem because I think it's pretty close to what I just said. All right, amplitude, somebody? Anybody? 3. B is, this is the factored form, so the C and the B are already separated. So the B is pi, so the period is 2 pi divided by that B, which is just 2. So now, because that's true, and the phase shift is what? Right 1/2. We're not going to have any pi's on our graph. The pi disappeared when we divided it out, so we're just going to count by numbers, not things with pi. The vertical shift, is there one, guys? No plus or minus on the back, right? It's all inside of here. So this is none. And the shape, it is a cosine, a positive cosine, so it goes maximum to maximum. All right. So there is no, I always do the midline first. There is none. So y equals 0 is our midline. There's no shifting up and down. Amplitude is 3. So the maxes are all going to occur at 3. And the mins are going to occur at -3. So if you're taking notes, midline first, then address the amplitude, and then address the phase shift. So the phase shift is to the right 1/2. So we're going to start over here at 1/2. Now, what am I adding on is the quarter points, the period divided by 4. Well, what's 2 divided by 4? Quarter points for this one are 2 over 4, or every 1/2. So if we went to the right 1/2, and I add out another half for the next quarter point, I'm at 1, right? At another half, I'm at what? 1.5 or 3/2. Then the next one would be 4/2 or 2, 5/2. Now, where's this going to start? Or stop, I mean, sorry. Where's it going to finish? Is it going to finish at 2? Which is it? Because if the period is 2 doesn't mean it finishes by 2, right? Because we shifted it to the right. So it's going to start at pi over 2. We probably should have drawn it first and then labeled it. Usually goes better for me. Midline, half later. Bottom, half later. Back to the midline, half later, because that's the quarter points were half. And max, half later. So it finishes at 5 pi over 2. Now this particular one, if you backed it up, it actually looks like a what? It could be a sine graph. If you wrote that same equation for sine, it would be 3 sine pi x, because it wouldn't need the phase shift anymore if you called it a sine graph. So this is what it's equivalent to, but you don't have to know that right now. Okay, domain is still all real numbers, and the range, guys? Yep. We good? Questions on that one? All right. I'm going to run around the room this time. Jacob, can you tell me something? Anything? Okay. Anybody got a comment? Amplitude is always positive 2. Be careful that you write it that way or it'll be wrong. And the shape is going to do what, Jacob, because of that negative? Yes. So sine usually starts at the midline and goes up. This one's going to start at the midline and go down like this. Remind me of that because I'll get it wrong later. Brandon, can you tell me something? Anything you want, doesn't matter. Up 1, okay? Vertical shift up 1. Can you tell me what the midline's going to be then? Same thing, y equals 1. Yep, make sure it's an equation, y equals 1. I'm going to actually draw that. It's up to you guys. You can just rename the midline if you want. Okay, and 2 above that would be 3. And 2 below that would be -1. Everybody okay? Okay. Isabella, can you tell me something? The phase shift is to the right pi over 4. Aislinn, can you tell me something? Well, B is 1, right? Because there's nothing in there. So that makes the period just 2 pi. Can anybody explain the quarter points then? I won't call on anybody if anybody volunteer. Yes, 2 pi. Be careful. I'm not sure that was right what you said. 2 pi is the period. And then we divide by 4 to get the quarter points, right? So it's the period divided by 4. That comes out pi over 2. So this shifts to the right a pi over 4 Oh, right, I'm just writing this so you could maybe write it down in your notes. Plus pi over 2 will be the next quarter point. What is that going to be, guys? 1/4 plus 1/2. Math, enter, enter. If you don't know that. But I hope some of you can add a 1/4 and a 1/2. What do you get? Yes. So 3/4, which means the next quarter point, you would add another pi over 2, which would be 5/4. You're adding a pi over 2, not a pi over 4. Remember, the period was 2 pi. So we're adding a 1/2. Now, if it feels better to you to just like start and say this was pi over 4 and then draw it first, and then go back and label because I messed up already. This should be where the next quarter point is. And back here. I'm out of room, aren't I? I'm like, oh yeah, just slide it over. Yeah, there's no room to slide it over. The max would be at what? 7/4. And where would it hit the midline again? If I were writing the ordered pairs, I'd have pi over 4, 1, 3 pi over 4, -1, 5 pi over 4, 1, 7 pi over 4, 3, and then the next one would be at 9 pi over 4, and back at the midline, which is 1. What is 9/4, guys? I need to make sure this makes sense to you. What is 9/4? It's 2.25, right? 9/4? Is that 2 1/4? Is that where this should end? If the period is 2 pi, and we shift it to the right 1/4, it should end at 2 1/4, right? Are you with me? My graph is bad, but is it making sense now? These are the quarter points. You start at the phase shift, and then you add the quarter point, and you keep adding the quarter point, and that's what you label. So it was 1/4 plus a pi over 2 is 3/4, plus a pi over 2 is 5/4, plus a pi over 2 is 7/4, plus one more pi over 2 is 9/4. And I get an F in graphing on this one. Okay. Domain, anybody? And range? Okay. Everybody all right? Number 3, there was 2 closed, so I'm going to have you put one in here as an open, okay? I had to decide where we're going to do this factored or unfactored. I'm going to do it as a factored. So put that parenthesis in there, because unfactored, it wouldn't need 2 closes at the end. All right, so the way it's written, Haley, can you tell me anything? I know you can tell me something. B is 2, which makes the period 2 pi divided by 2, or pi. Brandon, what do you got to say? Up 3, which also makes the midline. Good job. Cameron, tell me something. Good job. Right pi over 4, there you go. Right pi over 4, because it's in this factored form, so it just tells us what C is right there. Martin. Yep, the 1 out here in front would just tell us the amplitude is going to go up 1, down 1. Adriana, right? What's the shape? Yes, good job. Goes down, back up. Okay. Okay, I'm going to draw the midline at 3. You can certainly rename your midline if you want. And it goes 1 above and 1 below that. So can we do the range already in the domain? What's the range, guys? All right, now before I do anything else, do you remember what order? Midline was first, amplitude, then what? Remember my little list here? Midline, amplitude, phase shift, and then quarter points. So what's my phase shift? To the right, pi over 4. So I'm going to start over here at pi over 4 somewhere. And then I'm adding quarter points. But what are the quarter points this time? Phase shift was pi over 4. Plus the quarter points, which are pi, the period, divided by 4 for quarter. So what do we get for the next one? 2/4. And then you'd add another pi over 4, so you'd have 3/4. And you'd have another pi over 4, so you'd have 4/4. Can someone reduce those? What's 2/4? Yeah. I'm going to draw it this time, because that's really how I would normally do them probably. I'm going to start up here, and it's going to go midline, bottom, midline, top. Okay. The next quarter point, which is where it hits the midline, I'm going to call 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Then when it hits the minimum, that's 3 pi over 4. Midline again is 4 pi over 4, which is pi, and then the maximum is 5 pi over 4. How are we doing? Now, this is what somebody's going to do. They're going to connect this back here. Is that right? Where would the next quarter point actually be if you went backwards? If you went to the left from pi over 4 to the right, you subtracted a pi over 4. It would be, yeah. Yep. So it could do that. I was thinking it was that our quarter points were pi over 2s. I'm totally. So this one could have been a sine graph without a shift. All right, moving on. Sorry. Yes, because I'm going to give you a picture of a graph, and I'm going to tell you eventually you have to write both a sine and a cosine for the same graph, but we won't do that. We'll do some tomorrow. Okay. All right, this is the one we're going to factor. This on, we're going to factor. This one, we're going to factor. Let's try that again. Okay, when you factor, what are you doing, guys? If I have 5x minus 20 and I write it as 5 times x minus 4, what did I really do to that 5? I divided it out. Everybody okay? So we're going to rewrite this. Let me move this up. We're going to rewrite this mess as 3 sine 1/2 parenthesis x plus something, close both parentheses, minus 1. But what do we have to do to find that something? We're divide by 1/2. What is pi divided by 1/2? It's not pi over 2. because it's pi times 2 over 1, which is 2 pi. Now see if that makes sense, Brandon. If you multiplied the half back in, you'd get half an x plus half of 2 pi, which would be 1 pi. Does everybody see that now? That makes sense? Okay, so, I don't know. Destiny, you start us off this time. What do you want to do? Amplitude is 3. B, anybody? B is 1/2 in either form, right? And what is 2 pi divided by 1/2? Nope. It's 2 pi times 2 over 1, or 4 pi. So the period is 4 pi. I don't know why that looks like a negative right there. It's not. All right, phase shift. That's the one that we messed with. Because we've factored it, it's now just what? Yeah, if you learned it this way in trig class, then you had to do C over B, which would still be 2 pi. So it is a plus 2 pi, which is actually what? Left 2 pi? That's going to go well on my graph. Okay. Vertical shift, anybody? Down 1, which makes the midline y equals -1. And the shape is a regular sign, so it starts the midline. Okay. You can just rename the midline if you want. I'm going to call this y equals -1. Goes up 3 above that, so I'd have 0, 1, 2 as my max. 3 below the midline, -2, -3, -4. Okay, so what is the order I'm following again? 1, I do my midline. 2, I use my amplitude of 3 to go above and below. -1 plus 3 is 2. -1 minus 3 is -4. You okay?
That's a positive.
-4, +2. Yes, sorry. Then the third thing I do is I look at the phase shift. This one is left 2 pi. So I'm going to start over here at -2 pi somewhere. At the midline though, right? That's going to be -2 pi, comma, -1. Now, I got to figure out what I'm going to count by to keep going on. And I add the period divided by 4. So if I am at -2 pi and I add the period, which is 4 pi, divided by 4, what do I get? What's -2 pi plus pi? Yes, the next quarter point is at -pi. I'm just going to go ahead and sketch this. From here, it goes up to the max. And that would be at -pi. So if I added another pi, I would be at 0. Oh, the midline, not 0. Okay. The midline is what? -1? So it would be a 0, -1. Mine looks like it goes through 0, 0. It shouldn't. Then minimum, then back to the middle. Okay. Can anybody tell me the ordered pairs? -2 pi, -1. -1 pi, +2. Then what?
0, 0.
Nope, 0, -1, because it's at the midline. I know. Then the bottom is, what are we counting by again? If I add another 4 pi over 4 or pi, what do I get? That was 0, right? And then if I add another 4 pi over 4 or pi, this would be pi right here. So I have pi, -4, and add another pi, and I'd be at 2 pi, -1. Anybody want to cry a little bit? All right. I'm going to teach you real quick to do the sinusoidal stuff, and then we'll try one more on worksheet 10, okay? Everybody got their graphing calculator out? We're actually going to do this one first, because the other one confused me because I was like, degrees. But any graphing you do, can someone shut the door? Any graphing you do with the sign regression, you need to be in radian mode. Okay, so put your calculator in radian mode. So make sure it says radians up at the top here, or go to mode and go down to where it says degrees and radians and make sure it's blackened around the left-hand radian, okay? Then we're going to enter the data in. This question is January, February, March, April. It says here to use x equals 1 to represent January. Now, they will sometimes skip months because they'll ask you to go back and fill in the missing month using the regression. This one does not, I don't think, does it? I don't think so. Just 1 through 8. So how do we get to enter those again? Stat, enter, put in 1 through 8. And then go over to list 2 and put in the number of visitors in thousands for a museum each month. So they had 10,000 visitors. You don't need to put it in as 1,000. Just put it as 10. 8,000 visitors, 11,000, etc. But we're just putting in 10, 8, 11, 15, 24, 30, 32, and 29. All right, I would like to look at this data. Does everybody have them in yet or not? Make sure 8 and 29 match up or you did something wrong. Has everybody got 8 and 29? All right. I would like to look at what these look like. So I'm going to turn my stat plot on. Second, y equals. Plot 1 is on. Got to hit enter a couple times so that it's on. I'm just doing the scatter plot, so it's the first one here, list 1 and list 2. Now, I could do a zoom stat. I might even see what that looks like. All right. I actually went through and said, well, this is months. No, X is X is months. So I could put in 0 to 12 if I wanted. And this was the temperature. And it looks like it was staying below like 50. It's not temperature. It's thousands of visitors. Just kidding. The other one is temperature. It was like went up to 32, right? So it's the same graph. Just you can change the window if you want. Doesn't matter. All right. We're going to find the regression. Here we go. Stat. Right arrow. Can you find sign regression in this mess? If you go all the way down, it's choice C, sign regression. Did you find it? It's faster if you go up, if you get practice in this, but sign regression, okay? You're going to hit enter, but then it does, if you have this newer calculator, it says iterations. It defaults to 3, just leave that at 3. If you have an older calculator, you won't see that at all. Okay, make sure it says list 1 and list 2, because that's where you have stored them. And then you have to store the equation on the quiz. This is one that has like 4 variables in it, A, B, C, and D, and they're all long decimals. So you need it to store all those in there for you. The fast way is alpha trace. The other way is the vars key, arrow to the right, enter, 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 and then make sure you hit calculate, and you should see this. Mine doesn't have an R value or anything. I don't know if it's not turned on or you can't get it for sign. Questions? Anybody get 12.0 something for their? Okay. Now we're supposed to write this down on our paper. Did it go on there or not? It did not. There we go. So I'm going to write this down. 12.005. I'll go 3 places. Then it said, writing it down in the form that they have you. What do you notice about their form? It's unfactored, right? But it really doesn't matter. We're not going to deal with it. 0, 6. No. B is 0.638. Then X, then plus C, which is negative 2.858, maybe. Parenthesis plus D, which is 19.839. Okay. That was a 6, by the way. All right, if you stored it, you should now be able to go to the graph again and see that it's going through those points. Now, can we predict what's going to happen in October now? It wants us to predict October. What month is October? 10th month. So you could go to second graph to the table and go down to 15.4 roughly 1,000 visitors. Or you could go trace. You do need to hit up arrow so that you're on the equation and then trace out to 10. And you should get the you should get the 15.4 at the bottom. Everybody get 15.4 one way or the other? Okay, so that was 15.4. What should we label it though? It's not 15.4 visitors. Thousands of visitors. All right. One more regression or one more phase shift today? You want to do phase shift? Okay. We can come back tomorrow and do the other regression on number 5. Do you want to do this number 1 or number 2? Ooh, number 2 is kind of ugly. Let's do this one. This is on 10B. Amplitude, anybody? 1, the period. There's nothing in here for B. So the period is just 2 pi. Is this not on 2B? Did you find it? Number 2 on 2B? Okay. Vertical shift up 2. Phase shift to the right, pi over 3. Why did I say this one's ugly? Because, oh my gosh, that's so crooked. If you start to the right, pi over 3, you got painful things to add on there, right? What am I adding on? By the way, my vertical line shift was up here at 2, and I went up 1 to 3, down 1 to 1. It's going to start at the maximum. Okay. Pi over 3 is the phase shift plus the period divided by 4. Okay, and you can literally type that on your calculator. Oh, Brandon, this was for you. Sorry. You're late for your career conference. I hope I didn't mess up your whole life. You can take your stuff because you won't be back, I'm sure. So don't type the pi in, guys. Type 1 divided by 3 plus 2 divided by 4. Math, enter, enter. And you get what? 5, 6 is your next one. Now what am I going to add at again? The quarter point, which was the 2 pi over 4. So do plus 2 divided by 4. Math, enter, enter. and you get a lovely 11/6.
Pretty numbers here.
It is. Plus another 2/4, which we could have written as 1/2. I get that, but since we're doing it on the calculator, it doesn't matter. So the next quarter point is 7/3. And I think we need one more, right? Plus 2/4, math, enter. 10/3, anybody? There's a pi in there, you just can't read it. It's 10 pi over 3. Okay, so it starts at the max, midline, minimum, oh my gosh, whoop, whoop, midline, back to the max. Mine's awful. So we have pi over 3, 3, 5 pi over 6, 2, 11 pi over 6, 1, 7 pi over 3, 2, and 10 pi over 3, 3. Okay, that last one is 10 pi over 3, 3. It's too scribbly and I can't fix it up there on that corner. It doesn't want to write there. Okay, so one more time, make yourself a note. You start with the phase shift, and then you keep adding the period divided by 4, and then you add again the period divided by 4, and then you add again the period divided by 4. Everybody good? That's how you find the quarter points. And if they're in terms of pi, just leave the pi off and write it on your graph. I'm trying to make this as straightforward as I can. Now, do you think this is something you should just watch Hofbauer do once and be okay with it? I don't think it's going to go very well. There is like next to no assignment. Look at this. There are 3 of these, I think, you have to do out of the book. And then I think these 2 are both regressions on the calculator, okay? And by the way, I don't think these have both a phase shift and a period change. 3. And they're on page 12.5a. Really, Hofbauer? You gave us the bookwork too? Bless you. You want me to do the other regression? The other regression is, or you want to do it for a warm-up? We can do it tomorrow.